Everyone, happy Thursday and welcome to Live Weather Impact right here on WCNC Plus. I am meteorologist Brittany Van Voorhees, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich, of course, out this week at a weather conference, but you guys are getting a nice treat tonight because we actually are going to have him join us to talk a little bit more about that crazy thing that was falling from the sky earlier today. But speaking of things that are crazy and falling from the sky, we have to talk about the weather that we have across the Carolinas right now, and that is thunderstorms. Now, I do want to preface this, folks, by letting you know that, well, I guess if you weren't watching yesterday, today, not as hot, not as humid, not as many storms, and the storms are not as strong, but they are strong nonetheless. And so we do have this cluster of widespread storms, not just across the Carolinas, but also across the Charlotte area. So we're going to look at where it is right now. Essentially, if you're thinking big geographical locations that you can target, it's Lake Norman, you guys. So Cornelius, Huntersville, over toward Westport, Lowellsville, Sherrills Ford, essentially right over the lake. We have had a decent amount of lightning strikes here over the past few hours, but honestly, these are dissipating right now, which tells me that the storm is starting to weaken. So about, I would say, an hour or so ago, some of these large clusters were getting closer to about 100 or so lightning strikes. Now the latest is 29. Is that what that says? Goodness gracious. Bad eyesight over here. But yes, 29 nonetheless. So we're going to zoom in here a little bit more. So again, there's Cornelius, there's Caldwell, there's Huntersville, there's over toward Mount Morn, there's Lake Norman, there's Mooresville. So again, all of these areas are included in right now, I would say, these strong storms across the Carolinas. So widen out a little bit to see other action that we have, and honestly it's not much. We have that storm over Lake Norman. We have a few little clusters here south of Huntersville, closer to Croft, Joplin, near Allison Ferry, and then a few more little pockets here. I would say mostly near the Sugar Creek area, just outside of Noda, just north there toward Atondo Junction, over toward Harrisburg. So again, most of this is just light to moderate rain. It's actually not to the severe criteria that we had, but We have other, I would say, radar signatures that I do want to continue to watch, because we were actually a really big gust front or outflow boundary that actually expands all the way south toward Greenwood, Newberry, into just south of Charlotte. So typically when we see these large outflows, we have additional storms that develop on top of them. And we had this yesterday. If you remember and you were watching, Becca and myself, we were in the studio. Essentially, those outflow boundaries have storms that accumulate on top of them. It's that cool outflow that happens, also known as a gust front, when there's a thunderstorm. And so normally there's enough action to see additional storms develop on top of those. I'm going to pull up a graphic really quick just so we can do a little outflow explainer. My computer wasn't letting me log in earlier, as both James and Lily know. So, we're cooking with gas here though now. Okay, so outflow boundary explainer. So you have a really, really tall thunderstorm cloud. And within that tall thunderstorm cloud, when you get a nice cold pool that develops and then pushes to the ground, that is what causes that outflow and that gust front. So eventually, because of that cold pool, we're able to see additional storms that develop on top of it. You also get cold pools and areas of dry air too within thunderstorms. That also cause hail to develop. So you see a lot of outflow boundaries on days where we have hail. So essentially it's the difference between the cold pool and the warmer air that eventually causes more storms to continue to develop on top of it. And speaking of hail, I haven't seen a lot of hail reports coming into our storm reports. In fact, actually storm reports have been significantly lacking today. That could be because we're not seeing a lot of storms that are causing anything to give a storm report on, or it could be a situation in which we just don't have that many. But we have had some really strong radar signatures indicating hail, especially in that cell that we have right near Cornelius and Caldwell. So earlier we were tracking the hail core right over here, again, just to the south and southeast of Lake Norman. But now, as we look at radar again, I'm going to pop it back on, I'm starting to see some brighter returns actually on the northeastern side of this cell. So this is closer to Landis near Fishertown right now. This is just north and west of Kannapolis. But notice this really, really bright radar return. That also could indicate some hail. Typically when we see bright returns like this, it's heavy rain mixing with hail that's being shoved to the ground, which is why it's picking up some of that pink coloring. I'm going to see if we can get a slicer on this and see if it will pop up correctly. So that thunderstorm, oh my gosh, it's so tall it went off the screen. So that looks like it's about 40,000 feet, so certainly could be high enough in order to have some hail mixed in. You can see what almost looks like that hail core. You see that little pink shading there on our radar signature. So again, likely watching some of that hail again on the northwestern side of Cabarrus County. Other than that, though, we don't have any storm action. The storms just north of us that were causing severe thunderstorms just north of the mountains have stalled. There's also a flash flood warning in effect for those areas. That's mainly toward Greensboro, the Triad, and north. So again, not dealing with that. And honestly, we're going to lose a lot of the peak heating of the day within the next 2 hours, which I do think is going to help. I know we mentioned this last night, but I want folks to just remember that the reason why we were so much cooler today, and again, I know that's relative for this time of year, is because of the storms we had yesterday. So we had rain, cooled air. It cooled off the ground, and so our lows actually started at 70 this morning, which was even lower than expected, versus 79 we had yesterday. It allowed for the dew points to drop. So I was looking at some of the comparisons, and this morning it felt like 74, which was the air temperature. Yesterday morning at around 8 a.m., same time it felt like 74. It was 99 for a feels like temperature. So that is a difference of 25 degrees in one day. So again, a substantial difference today, not just with the storms, but of course with the heat and humidity. Our feels like temperature did get to 100 at the airport, but that was expected. That is technically cooler than where we were yesterday. Yesterday we had an actual air temperature of 100 with a feels like of 110 at Charlotte Douglas. And in fact, it actually did break some of the daily heat index records that we have. So we have essentially a daily heat index record in Charlotte for every single hour. And Lily, our amazing weather intern, actually reran some of the numbers for me this morning. So yesterday, we set a new record at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., and then what's this time? I'm trying to read. And at 2 p.m. That's a lot of times And all of those numbers, of course, now go in the record books for June 25th of 2025. So that's all the negatives of yesterday. Again, the positives of today is that we're slightly cooler, slightly drier. As we look ahead to the rest of this evening, let's try to take a look at this futurecast. Again, you can see things will get much, much less aggressive. By 11 o'clock, most of the action is wrapped up. Tomorrow, again, a rinse repeat forecast will be hot and humid to start off the day with scattered storms in the afternoon. But again, not nearly as hot and humid as where we were yesterday. I know we discussed this a little bit, but heat and humidity is normal. Yes, thunderstorms are normal for this time of year, but to the threshold we had yesterday and on Tuesday, that is dangerously hot, dangerously humid. Of course, there were unfortunately some fatalities over the last few days related to heat-related illnesses. So I know Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich said this last week on air, but I definitely agree with him. It's people say stop talking about the heat and humidity. It's hot all year, but until heat is no longer the number one weather-related killer in the United States, we're going to keep talking about it, especially when it is dangerously hot. Now, we're going to switch gears because something very interesting happened across the Southeast today. There's so many things that I could say about this right now, but we're actually going to bring in Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich. He is at our sister station in Boise, Idaho, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the fireball, the bolide, the something crazy that happened in the sky today, Brad.
Yeah, kind of rare that you see a meteor during the daylight hours. You had to know that it was probably going to be a bolide or a piece of space debris, because typically a lot of these meteors, the size, guys, is only about the size of a grain of sand, and they're usually high up in the atmosphere. This one actually was much, much lower, so low that you actually heard sounds. There's some ring camera from central Georgia of that meteorite making it probably to the surface, and we have possible impact at a home there in Henry County. So this is really unique, the fact that you actually have a bolide meteor in the middle of the day, but also the chance that somebody's going to find a meteorite or a meteoroid, which would be super valuable. So even though they had damage to their house, Brittany, that thing's going to be worth some money if they find it.
I feel like someone has to go find this and find the pieces. Brad, can you talk a little bit, because I think there was so much confusion earlier today about people calling it a meteorite, they were calling it a meteor, they were calling it a fireball, like what the difference is between these multiple different things, because I know sometimes when it comes to science, it comes down to like a nuance and a little bit of semantics, but we want to be accurate in our reporting.
Yeah, for sure. So, when you hear fireball, we're typically thinking fireball meteor, and that's what basically is a shooting star. If it has enough, a light to it or flame to it, it kind of gets that nickname fireball. But when we say that, people are like, what's a fireball? It's essentially a meteor. Now, when the meteor makes it low enough and fragments or even explodes in the atmosphere, it would be called a bolide meteor. So that's one that's very rare. You only get a handful of those every year. They make some sound. You actually can get an impact at the surface. You could actually get a meteorite, which is a piece of debris that makes it all the way to the surface. So most of the meteor showers you hear about, or most of the meteors or fireballs that we have, are high up in the atmosphere. They never make it down to the ground. So you're not going to actually hear or see them. So this is why this one was so rare. And the fact that it happened during the day, Brittany, means it was probably pretty large. I mean, maybe the size of a golf ball. When I say large, it's the difference between a grain of sand and a golf ball is pretty significant, meaning it likely survived most of its travel down to the surface.
So I know that we got reports of people seeing it in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, I believe Georgia. Well, obviously Georgia. I don't know if I'm missing a state, James, but you posted
Virginia,
online
Tennessee,
about how people were getting confused as to like how close it was to where they were based on their location and just like the curvature of the earth. I know that sounds like very basic geography, but can you talk more about like if someone is in Lexington, South Carolina, I feel like, for example, we saw a lot of reports there of people thinking that it happened right where they were, but they were technically further away than people in Georgia who saw the bits and pieces. Can you talk about what people should be looking for maybe when they see a fireball or something like this? Because just because you can see it doesn't necessarily mean it's close to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just because this happened in Georgia doesn't mean you only saw it in Georgia. You got to remember, the top of the atmosphere, we see the space station fly over all the time over the entire East Coast. When there's rocket launches from Cape Canaveral going up the East Coast, we see them. So you see them over a large area. When they're low on the horizon, that means it's really far away. If it were to be right over you, it would be straight above your head. So because of the curvature of the Earth, that's why everybody saw it from Virginia, Tennessee, all the way to South Carolina and North Carolina. So from your perspective, depending where you were, if it was very low in the horizon, that could have been 2 states away. But you got to remember too, it entered the atmosphere at the very top, so that's visible over a really large area of the southeast. So just because you saw it doesn't mean it happened over you. It could have happened 2 states away, just like when we see those SpaceX launches going up the East Coast. I mean, that's well off the East Coast, but we're seeing them in Charlotte and western North Carolina because it's getting high up in the atmosphere and the sun's illuminating the vapor trail from the rocket. So it's just kind of a visible, it's a point of view, and sometimes I think people confuse the fact that, hey, it happened in Georgia, why did I see it in North Carolina or even South Carolina?
It's like when there's a thunderstorm in Rock Hill, but we can see it from Charlotte. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's storming in Mecklenburg County. And we're like, no, you can just see it because it's so high up in the atmosphere.
At the beach all the time.
I'm just curious, this is not on our talking points James and I talked about, but so this happened today. You're at a conference for the American Meteorological Society, not to be confused with the American Meteor Society.
Not to be confused,
How was it being there with like a bunch of essentially science nerds that think this stuff is so cool? Like, were you guys chatting about it, trying to figure out what it was, going back to your stations and giving information? Just how was that? I just feel like it's a cool story to happen while you're already at that conference.
Yeah, so ironically, the American Meteorological Society doesn't study meteors. We actually study weather. But the word meteor actually comes from a Latin word that means you study anything that fell from the sky. And as you know, we call raindrops hydrometeors, right? So in this case, we study things that fall from our atmosphere, not technically from outer space. But ironically, one of the first talks this week at the American Meteorological Society talk was on meteor showers and talking about them on air, kind of the station scientist part of what we do. So we did talk about early in the week and some of the things to look out for. Now, while this happened today during the sessions, most people had no idea. I was actually meeting with some of our corporate folks, and so I knew about it right away. We jumped into your stream there back at the station, and so we started talking about it, but people started walking out of the sessions and hearing about it, and then looking at like the global lightning mapper from GOES, which was a pretty cool way to kind of see where this bolide occurred, because typically the global lightning mapper is an instrument on the GOES satellite that detects flashes of lightning. Well, if you see a flash and there's no cloud there, you're either getting sun glint off of maybe a big, solar farm, or in this case, it was because it actually detected the flash of the meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere. And so that was one way you could use some of the weather technology we have to kind of figure out where these happen. You also can use Doppler radar. When these things get low in the atmosphere, the Doppler radar can actually detect it coming down to the Earth. So I'm kind of curious to see if the Peachtree City office will actually see some of this on their next rad Doppler, and they were actually posting some of the images earlier of what was falling into Georgia, because it was really close to their office there in central Georgia.
Yeah, there's been so much chatter online, especially after yesterday, the radar site, what was that, over in Alabama, had to do a reboot, and people were freaking out thinking that we were like being attacked or something. So with the fireball on top of it, I just feel like social media, especially when it came to people who are interested in weather, interested in science stuff, it was just going a little bit crazy. We did see the graphic.
This is a pretty rare event.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I can't hear you actually here in the studio unless James turns you on.
Well, James, you got to turn me on, James. That's what you got to No, I was going to say, it's a pretty rare event. I mean, to see a meteor like this during the middle of the day is pretty rare. Bolides, like I said, you probably only get a handful of these a year in the United States or even the whole world. So it's kind of rare to see one in the middle of the afternoon. I mean, 12:35 in the afternoon is kind of rare.
Yeah, it's got to be really bright in order to be able to see it when there's bright sunshine. Anything else that you think it's interesting, maybe what happened today or coming from the conference that you want to give people a preview of? I know you'll probably be talking about it for weeks and months to come, all the stuff that you're learning and talking to people about.
Yeah, it's great to be out here among colleagues because you learn so much, and actually visiting our sister station here, KTVB, which has been great to come out here and kind of see them and talk to them and just kind of share knowledge with all the other folks across the country. But yeah, we learned a lot. There are a lot of what, and then we talk about this a lot about this, Brittany, is the social science of what we do. The science of forecasting has come a long, long way. Contrary to popular belief, we're very good at forecasting weather. The problem is communicating those forecasts. Like we saw with Helene in western North Carolina, the best forecasted storm of the entire hurricane season last year, but people were still caught off guard because they didn't understand the risk. They weren't able to assess the threat to them. And so there was a lot of talk about that, like how do we communicate these risks and impacts to people a lot better so that they take these storms more seriously, because we do have information about where they're going. We've got to get people to listen.
Yeah, it's just so hard to quantify sometimes a storm to people that have never experienced something like that. And unfortunately, in a place that gets hit by hurricanes a lot, like you could go to someone who lives in, for example, Fort Myers and say, well, this storm's not going to be exactly like Ian. You guys remember what 18 feet of storm surge looked like, so prepare accordingly. But when nobody in the Western Carolinas had any threshold for a storm, you can say destructive, catastrophic flooding all you want, but they have no way to quantify what that actually means.
Yeah, so actually, it's just so you guys know, one of the things we did the first day was actually a whole session on Hurricane Helene, and that's why I was out here initially to give a keynote on our coverage and what we did during, after, and then the recovery efforts. And then Jason Boyer, who's a good friend of mine, he works over in Asheville at WLOS, not our sister station, but a competitor over there, did a great presentation. And then we had Dale Eck from the National Climatic Data Center, which is based in Asheville, and I think you would appreciate this, Brittany. They were going through the storm and trying to save all that climate data because the cooling system for the data center was offline. They actually had to pipe water in from a pond to run the cooling for the computers there to keep all the data safe. So it was really interesting to see how they had to deal with Helene and keep all that climate data safe, which is based in Nashville. People don't realize.
Yeah, that's interesting, and of course you know that. Of course I want the climate data to survive. Were there any conversations, and I know we have this problem every single time that there's a hurricane, because obviously some of our sensors, whether that's a rain gauge, temperature, wind gauge, whatever, can't withstand, oftentimes a landfalling strong Category 4 or 5, et cetera. But we here in Charlotte noticed that a lot of our sensors for the mountains, the foothills, and areas west started to go offline, obviously as Helene was moving inland. Have there been conversations as to how we could potentially make some of those, temperature radar, gauges, maybe easier to track during a storm? Because I just feel like we get really, really bad storms. Then all of a sudden there's a point where they all go offline, and next thing you know, you kind of lose some of that data. So maybe not the climate data, but you lose some of the in-storm data that comes when there's a bad storm.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ways to address that was better mapping. And I think because most of the main river basins in western North Carolina have good mapping, but most of this flooding occurred on the tributaries, the smaller creeks and streams and those hollers that were going down into the bigger creeks. And there's no gauges there, and there's no threshold to say, hey, this is how much rain is going to cause flooding in those locations. So better modeling and mapping, especially hydrology-wise, is going to be important. But as you know, because of all the damage from Helene, the hydrology of each of these river basins has changed dramatically. So now we don't know how much water it's going to take to cause flooding on some of these basins because the river's completely different. It's got a different path now. Plus you throw in the landslide and mudslide risk, which is essentially created what would be burn scars. The water runs right down the mountain now into these areas. And one of the interesting things that I found out early in some of these talks was some of the flooding was caused by down trees blocking, causing temporary dams on these creeks and streams, and then the water built up, and the temporary dam basically amounts to a beaver dam because it was a bunch of wood, broke loose, and then that caused a lot of flash flooding as well. So it was kind of interesting to see the various ways that the rain, the wind, and the water all impacted people. So I think going forward, the mapping, and I think that was a talking point, was the mapping of flood mapping in western North Carolina and landslide risk, which I know we have a couple of geologists which are working on that right now with LIDAR to remap most of western North Carolina so we have a better gauge on where these landslide risks are higher. And also the fact that probably, and this is the sad part of this, is some of these areas are going to be deemed unsafe in the future and not be able to rebuild on. So some of these homes that were swept away because that's an unstable slope going forward, they're not going to be able to rebuild on that exact piece of land.
Rebuild continues, and of course, we keep everybody impacted by Helene still in our thoughts and prayers and are working to continue to tell their stories. And I know we'll have those as we get closer to the anniversary in September. Brad, have a great time for the rest of your conference. We miss you here in Charlotte, but I can't wait for all the new information that you bring back. We're going to switch gears back to talk about what fell from the sky today. James popped up with some cool new video that he found from Skydive Carolina that literally caught the fireball streaking through the sky as people were skydiving. Now, I myself have personally never skydived. I've thought about it. Scares me a little bit. Different conversation for a different day, but really cool. You can see in the bottom portion of your screen there that they were able to catch it as someone was falling. Wonder how it feels to be falling at a similar rate to a fireball up in the atmosphere. On the same topic, of course, we have our expert that we love, Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich, who literally knows everything about everything. But our sister station, 11 Alive, over in Atlanta, WXIA, one of their meteorologists, Melissa Nord, was able to talk to an expert from the American Meteor Society. As Brad was mentioning earlier, we as meteorologists study hydrometeors, not regular meteors. So Mike Hankey had a lot of really interesting information to give us and actually cleared up multiple questions that I myself and the rest of our weather team had back here at WCNC Charlotte. Take a listen.
So every time an object hits Earth's atmosphere from space, it's going from a vacuum to, a dense, atmosphere, and that causes friction, and it causes this, illumination of light that we see in the sky. And that light's usually directly proportional to the speed and the size of the object. So larger objects tend to be brighter, and so on, and last longer in the sky. When an object reaches deep enough in the atmosphere, it creates a sonic boom. We see this with the space shuttle, with SpaceX launches that come back down, and we see them with meteorites, meteorite falls. When an asteroid, a fragment of an asteroid comes through the atmosphere, it survives because it's large enough and the angle was just right on the Earth. It breaks apart and hundreds of stones fall to the ground. If it happens in a populated area, which it sounds like this one did, you're going to potentially get rocks hitting houses and that kind of thing.
And those rocks hitting houses, how fast estimated would they be traveling? Do they slow down a lot? Obviously, they slow down quite a bit in Earth's atmosphere, but if they're creating a sonic boom, they must be moving quickly with a lot of force.
They are moving very fast, and when they hit Earth's atmosphere, they could be going 50,000 miles per hour or faster, but they quickly decelerate, and by the time they come and they stop all their cosmic velocity at like 20,000 or 30,000 feet up. And by the time they hit your roof, they're going about the speed of a golf ball or maybe a little bit faster. So still hundreds of miles an hour, but a far cry from the 50,000 miles an hour.
Is it safe to say, Mike, that the people who thought that they felt an earthquake or they heard that boom, that in fact was from this, are you classifying it as a fireball, a meteor, a meteorite? How are you classifying it?
This would be technically considered a bolide because it explodes. And when a meteor comes in, it'll just be a normal meteor or a shooting star for like a Bootid or a Perseid meteor. And then the next step up is a fireball where it's brighter than the planet Venus up to the full moon. And when we get brighter than that, especially when it explodes in this terminal flash and it's accompanied with the sonic booms and the meteorites, those are called bolides. And that just means that the body broke apart in its flight in.
And we want to say thanks so much, of course, to WXIA meteorologist Melissa, as well as can't even talk today, you guys. American Meteor Society Operations Manager Mike for doing that interview. I want to give you guys a quick update on what is happening outside before we rock and roll and we head out of here at just about 30 seconds or so. But severe thunderstorm warning. We just had a new one pop up here. This is for Cabarrus County, Iredell County, and Rowan County. Of course, I will be in the Weather Center keeping a close eye on these as we go throughout the evening. So again, this is the one we were tracking earlier, just outside of Landis, just outside of China Grove. Definitely starting to see some heavy rain there in Kannapolis. Heavy rain, gusty winds, some small hail, all possible. Again, we'll pop into streaming if necessary. If not, we'll see you back on WCNC Charlotte for another weather update at 11 o'clock. Stay tuned for more from Vanessa.